Crickets.
For the teacher, I'm not familiar with
Dr.
the-
Lorenz.
Well,
I'm not a doctor, but thank you.
as far as on a moral standard, and like the other gentleman was talking about, where is that line where you step in and don't step in? Why do you think the government hasn't tried controlling any of the cartels that even actually deal with some of the communities in, particularly California or some of the border states? Where, I mean, is that not past the line as far as all the drugs that are being smuggled by these people and all the legal money and the legal immigrants that come over here? Not in particular the ones that work, but the ones that come over here and are gang affiliated. What would be your response to why the government doesn't step in there? Seems to be a big problem.
Maybe that's a little bit off the issue, because we're talking about U.S. military intervention in foreign countries. So in that case, I mean, I suppose you could talk about Colombia and so forth, nations where the U.S. military does have a presence there to fight the drug war. But that's a low-grade conflict. I'm not saying that human lives aren't being lost there, but that's a low-grade conflict. There's that large-scale military use there. I don't see how possible that can help that. It's more of a police action. It's an important one, but that's for governments on a police level to deal with, law enforcement.
How about the Iraq war? What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, I'm not defending all U.S. past military actions. So I don't want to have to say that. So that's not my point to defend that. I'm not saying every U.S. military strategy has been wisely used or our interventions all appropriate. Like Vietnam and Iraq would be examples of are very murky to say the least. Although I would say, I'm not going to defend that, but I would say that is a very complicated situation, and perhaps we will not know for 20 or 30 years long term how that turns out. Certainly right now, the whole world has deep concerns on how that's turning out currently. Although even for them, even that's mixed. We've got the Kurds in northern Iraq, and they are immensely grateful what took place because they had genocidal policies and brought upon them by Saddam Hussein during his time in power.
Don't you think it's kind of an Orwellian kind of thought process to attack, military intervention, go in and kill people who are killing people? Wouldn't you think that like a better solution or a more long-term solution would be like education, decreasing ignorance, hatred, racism?
I totally agree with that, but when you're dealing with Adolf Hitler, I don't think the educational process is going to do it. I don't think you can say, come to our seminar. So, by the way, I agree on a large level. I don't say military force is something you lightly take. It should be the last option. But sometimes you just cannot wait. Same thing for the Armenians. The Ottoman Turkish government was putting under pressure to stop this. But when you have an extreme ideology, they're not listening to even rational arguments. The SS were not listening to a rational argument that the Jews are scientifically different than us. It has their own insane logic to it. So I'm not sure that on that level you can wait for the educational process. I'm not saying you don't use those tools, like you cannot wait.
When you talk about the cost and the military intervention, who do you think is responsible for the aftermath? I mean, once you kicked off the dictators, once you've eliminated what's causing the harm on the people, there's people left to completely like a lawless kind of country. So should the U.S. also be responsible for placing somebody, which in history they have placed people that are not necessarily as helpful?
Yeah, and that's a fraught topic. It's a very difficult one, but one that has to be thought. I agree with you. That has to be one that's dealt with because you do involve, militarily, kind of you break it, you're responsible for fixing it. So the U.S. has a mixed track record on that. Sometimes we've done very well on that. I'd point to Japan and West Germany. South Korea are shining examples of potentially what can happen. All thriving democracies today, very healthy democracies, economically thriving, doing well. Other times it's much more difficult. Afghanistan, what we see right now, is a very difficult one. You have a lot of cultural issues, it can be very difficult. But even then I say, war is not going to fix it. It's simply to stop the worst of what's taking place. So it has to be other policies beyond warfare. So you can't drop some bombs. and then say, okay, well, thank God it's all over. So all governments have to be listening to the United States government, which is you may drop some bombs to stop the immediate killing, but the situation or line it needs to still be dealt with. So it is a part of the calculus that has to be looked at. I think one reason why the Obama administration is very reluctant for Syria, because it is so extraordinarily complex. Although I think there's both some argument that the chemical weapons, the Syrian government is currently in the process, seemingly, of eliminating chemical weapons. And the only reason they did that is because they seriously were concerned about U.S. military intervention, degrading their military, and then losing the Civil War. It's not because they felt bad about it. In fact, they denied they had them until about 3 weeks ago. The whole time they said we didn't even have them, and all of a sudden, okay, fine, if you don't bomb us, we'll get rid of something we don't even have. But it is very fraught, so I think that's why it's wisely decided. That one, perhaps.
Do you have time for one more question?
How do you reconcile collateral damage with U.S. military interventions? For example, like the Allied bombing of Dresden, which took the lives of countless non-combatants.
I don't want to defend the carpet bombing in World War II, but it is in a great war, and I think you have to say, I mean, warfare, there will be innocents killed. There's no question about it. There'll be people who, I think you always have to look at the calculus, which is, for example, it's true, we did do tremendous damage to Japan and Germany, and sometimes civilians were targeted, frankly. But I think that can be dealt with within the war itself. Doesn't mean you should not be involved. I think that's an inside issue within the war. What do you more allow yourself to do within the war? I think this really pertains sense to military force, because that's not something they had to do. The U.S. military, for example, early in the war, chose specifically not to do that kind of bombing. That was a late war decision, kind of war exhaustion, and the kind of inhumanity of the war affecting all sides. And that's something that is a danger. But I think that's something that, careful planning, it can be dealt with and can be avoided. Not all casualties, but large scale, like in Dresden.
Thank you. Marquise, you can give your rebuttal now. You have 5 minutes.
Isn't his first argument?
It's his first
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was like, I'm trying to think really quickly.
So 6 to 10.
6 to 10 minutes.
All right. I'm arguing against U.S. military intervention. Not totally. I believe, like Professor Lorenz said, there is times where intervention is necessary and needed, but one can, I don't see it as something to be taken unilaterally. One country shouldn't go into another country, determine what's right, what's wrong, and to start killing, because that's what it usually ends up being. Military intervention, it sounds real nice, limited boots on the ground. They're fancy terms for what actually happened. There's blood on the ground, kids are dying, people are dying, insurgents and militants are dying, and there's no verification on if the people that are dying are involved in the conflict or causing the conflict, or if they're just they're just like unnamed. When you see that the U.S. classifies militants, anyone male that's over like 18 of fighting age, that kind of paints the picture a little bit differently. You're not just killing insurgents. You could kill a barbecue and all the 18-year-olds are military insurgents, even though they had no reason to be in your war, no wanting to be in your issue. They are now. So for me, I just think intervention isn't something to be taken lightly. It should be, like Professor Lorenz said, the last thing. It shouldn't be the first thing called for. It shouldn't be what you hear on the news. The first thing to go into the country is intervention. It should be diplomacy, trying to figure out what's going on, actually trying to fix the problem and not feeling both sides. Because like we look at Syria, I mean, one, I see it as, how does the U.S. have the moral authority to say you can't use chemical weapons when, say, the U.S. ourselves, we use chemical weapons? In Fallujah in Iraq, we use tons. In Iraq, the whole campaign in general, we use tons of depleted uranium. And what that does, it's highly carcinogenic and it's radioactive, and we litter it all over their country. And so if I can read from this expert from a book, this is from Dr. Dahir Jamil, and what she's saying, noting the birth defects in the Iraqi city of Fallujah, the Jamil says, they're extremely hard to bear witness to, but it's something that we all need to pay attention to. What this has generated is, from 2004 up to this day, we are seeing a rate of congenital malformations in the city of Fallujah that has surpassed even that in the wake of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that nuclear bombs were actually dropped on at the end of World War II. Thus last November, a group of British and Iraqi doctors petitioned the UN to investigate the alarming rise of birth defects in Fallujah's hospitals. Young women in Fallujah, they wrote, are terrified of having children because of the increasing number of babies born grotesquely deformed with no heads, two heads, a single eye in their foreheads, scaly bodies, or missing limbs. In addition, young children in Fallujah are now experiencing hideous cancers and leukemia. The International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health published a study which found that Fallujah is experiencing higher rates of cancer and infant mortality than Hiroshima and Nagasaki did in 1945. And that's alarming. That's just the military intervention, the shooting, the bombs going off that we've become so used to, but it's having long-term effects to people that had nothing to do with anything that happened there. That's one major point as far as that. Another thing is the price for all these wars. We're so easy to start this intervention and get in these countries and entangle ourselves in these things, but the cost, people don't realize the cost for military interventions. It's estimated that Libya, that military intervention was at $896 million for that. Even for past wars, let's see, every hour taxpayers in the United States are paying $10.45 million for the cost of the war in Iraq since 2001. So that's an ongoing, every hour, $10.45 million is being sucked out of our economy constantly for that war. For the Iraq, it's every hour we are paying $824,000, which isn't that much, but it's going to be an estimated $814 billion total. So no, that's with Iraq and Afghanistan together. So you're looking at a total of almost $1.4 trillion just gone, and that's these interventions. But you don't hear that in the mainstream news. You're going to hear, our Social Security's doing it, but these interventions and all this war is also doing as well. All these, even the jets flying, that all costs money. It's a constant tens of thousands, tens of millions to do any of these actions. And with us, with our claim, our economy is so struggling, and we're having all these issues in our Congress, due to our economy. Why are we so willing to just jump into something that's going to cost so much? And then another cost we don't think about either is just the long-term effects of these wars. We think about what happened there, but what about all of the Medicare for our soldiers that went over there? All the health effects and all the benefits that we have to pay them out continually, that's going to be paid out. So we're still paying for Vietnam War vets. Those costs, each war, it just gets bigger with age. So the longer it goes on, it's just going to be huge. It's just more and more debt that I don't think we can handle or sustain. Another thing, I see drone strikes as military intervention. They're us use military force to carry out interests or whatever in different countries. We have a total for now running almost 4,000 dead, and that's between Pakistan, Yemen, and Iraq. And this is from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. They've been tracking drone strikes and the different kinds and civilian. And there's always underreporting of civilian deaths because there's always the thing that everyone they're shooting is military. But we're finding that these surgical strikes aren't all that surgical. They're killing. And then another thing too that the UN is now starting to do investigations. Just had a report on October 17th about is our drone strike usage and how we do things like double taps, where we will drone strike our target, and then we will wait for people to come help them and start picking up the wounded, and then drone strike them again, maximizing casualties. And that's not something that's made up. That's something now the UN, we have Christoph Haynes is the special rapporteur of extrajudicial killings. We just had a whole report written up on our drone usage and how it isn't helping world peace, isn't helping global security. If anything, it's working against that. And I guess the final thing too is, with just jumping into intervention like that, one thing I see is we get entangled and we end up using, say, the humanitarian aid and the people dying, and the imagery that's so shocking, and use that to get into the country, and then regime change happens, or we are heavily involved in the new governments that come into the scene. And I don't think that's right. We shouldn't be intervening to better our interests in a country or make it so their president will say yes to our president a little bit more easier. We should be only going in if there is a real reason, and if we are going in, it should be through the UN and international bodies. It shouldn't be just, I think something's wrong there, or I'm going to go take care of it. That's how wars have started. That's how it's been started. That's why we established the UN, so countries just can't go into another country and declare that that's not right and take over. Because yeah, so I think that I'm okay with that.